Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to my channel. Today, my special guest is Vincent Ollivier. Vincent, thank you so much for being with us today, and again, welcome.
Hello, and good day to everyone listening. And thank you very much for having me as a guest on your channel. And
You are
I hope
most
everyone's
welcome.
having a great day.
I hope so. Yes. So, Vincent, as a child, you felt like death was chasing you. As an adult, in 2018, you had a near-death experience that led you to reinvent yourself as an explorer of consciousness. I think that's wonderful. You invite us into the meanders of your mind to discover and ponder about subjects such as metaphysical concepts, lucid dreams, quantum healing, reincarnation, and much more. You have also written a book, which is called The Man Who Kept Dying, which is here. And I must say, it's a very well written book. So congratulations on that, Vincent. And
Thank you.
you're also translating it in French, I think, at the moment. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Well, I've translated about two-thirds. I'm
Two-thirds.
trying to find the time to complete it, but it's a background project. It's always been a background project. So
You
it's
will
one
get
that
there.
takes many years to achieve.
That's right. Yeah. See, it's a fiction. It's a novel, but it's a fiction. But actually, you actually base it on your own experience, your near-death experience, and also all the explorations that you've done around that.
Correct. Yes. It
And
was a choice of perspective, which I thought would just give me a bit more freedom to explore the big what if of the afterlife. And I thought, like, yes, I could tell my near death experience, but if I take the format of a novel, actually, I can take slices from my own life, try to see how they fit with my understanding of the spiritual realm, and just create from there a beautiful story.
that's really nice. And I know that you now strive to live your life from a place of self-love and joy. So we're going to see all that in a moment. But first of all, Vincent, would it be all right to start with your near-death experience and tell us what happened?
Absolutely. I think
Thank you.
it's only fair we start with that for the audience. The, the ND took place in January 2018. And at the time, I was living in the United Kingdom, a country in which I've lived close to 13 years in my life in total. I'm now back in France, but January 2018, I live in the UK. And the ND happened on a Sunday morning, in the early hours of a Sunday morning. However, just to give you a bit of context, I do have to take you back to a few days before that, Thursday evening. I'm sitting with my dear wife at a restaurant and we're having dinner. And it's a time in my life in which I'm doing way too many things. I'm overloading myself with too many projects. I've got a job that is quite demanding, that is quite complicated. And it's almost like I'm doing three roles in one. In parallel, I've had that desire for the past couple of years to completely change career. And I'm studying massage therapy and osteopathy. So in my free time, I'm doing that. During the weekends, I've got classes. I'm studying in the evening, and I do have the opportunity to start working at a clinic with an osteopath. And it's a time also because I'm doing so many things at a subconscious level. I'm aware that I do want to press pause with life, but I don't know how to. I feel like I have to complete what I've started, and I really struggle with finding time. So we're at the restaurant, and my better half, she's got many concerns about me, about my health. She says, "You're doing too much." She's got concerns about us, of course, and about her because she, in a way, she's sacrificing quite a lot for me to be able to switch careers. And during dinner, I do have a sharp, I describe it as a stabbing sensation on the right side of my abdomen. It comes out of nowhere. All of a sudden, it's I'm hit by a very strong pain. And I'm thinking maybe it's all the stress I'm going through. We get back home, the pain doesn't go away. And the time I'm just thinking maybe it was the food or it's the stress. Let's see what happens. But throughout the night, I cannot sleep. I've got continuous cycles of pain. And if anything, they keep increasing as the hours pass. In the early hours of what is now the Friday morning, we call the emergency services and they advise us that we go to the nearest hospital so I could get checked. So that's what we do, and it must be something like 6 o'clock in the morning. We get to the hospital. I almost collapse on the floor of the hospital due to pain. The pain levels were just so strong, and I really cannot comprehend what is happening to me. So we see a doctor. The doctor rules that it must be indigestion, and she gives me a couple of medicines, and yeah, it's true that right away I I vomit and I do feel better. And I'm thinking maybe I just had a bug or something I needed to expel out of my body, and it was quite violent, and that's it. So we get back home. I'm not really feeling well throughout the day. And if anything, the symptoms keep coming back. So Friday, Saturday, they increase. And that leads us to the early hours of Sunday morning, in which I've spent almost 3 days with ever increasing cycles of pain. And I keep repeating, or I kept repeating all this time, I'm dying. I feel like I'm dying. I could not pass any food. I could not ingest any food. I was just feeling that my body was failing me somehow, somewhat, with the most horrible sensation or thought of not being able to explain why in a rational manner. What is happening? I don't understand. So, in the early hours of Sunday morning, we do call the emergency services again. This time, they decide to send an ambulance to our place. So it must be 5:30 in the morning, 6 in the morning, and I've got a paramedic in my house, downstairs, laying down on the sofa in the living room, and there's the paramedic asking me the same set of questions I've gone through like a couple of times already, which is quite frustrating at that time. And my wife is nearby. Of course, she's extremely worried about what is happening. And the paramedic decides to inject some painkillers through IV. So I've got this very unpleasant sensation, as I describe it, of a warm fluid that trickles down your bloodstream. And it's quite unpleasant. And I don't really feel any difference right away. And he gives me a mask and he explains to me these are sort of like not just oxygen, but also medical gases. And I need to take like a few deep breaths, and that's going to help me relax. He explains that, my body having been through so much physical tension, I just need to relax a little. So I do as instructed. I take a couple of deep breaths. And by the second breath, I find myself in a complete different environment. And I'm floating in the best way to describe it would be a dark void. Everything is pitch black around me. There's nothing, just me. I'm wondering how I got there, and at the same time, it's like I've got no recollection of where I was the moment before. All I know is I'm there, and in a way, I'm just sort of enjoying that moment. It doesn't last very long because I'm a bit, at the same time, perhaps curious and dumbfounded about what's happening. But I see a tiny bit of light in the distance. And as soon as I look at it, it grows, or I get closer to it. But it seems it's so instant, there's no difference whether I'm getting closer to it or it comes towards me. And I feel like yeah, flying at the speed of light, and that sphere of light is growing bigger and bigger, and it's very all bright white light, the classical, theme of the near-death experience. I'm not even realizing that this is what's happening at that moment. And as I'm approaching the light, I'm very curious about it. And I see four silhouettes of four people or beings or presences standing within that light. Three of them are roughly the same size. One of them is quite tall. And I remember assigning them a more feminine presence than a masculine presence, except for the tall one that made me feel or think more of a masculine energy. And what happens at that moment is quite strange because I do see those four beings. I mean, I see them. I can't see them. I just see the silhouettes. I can't see their face. It's like looking at a dark shadow. And although I can't see them, I know that I know them, as if there was an energy connection at that very specific moment. And I know that I know them from a very long time. And they are more family to me than my own family or biological family in this lifetime. And I'm super elated that I'm rejoining with them. I've got this warm, loving feeling emanating from them. And yet, at the same time, I realize what's happening. And what crosses my mind right away is I'm so happy to see you, although I cannot really see your face. But also, if I'm seeing you, this is not right. It's not my time. It means that I'm dying or that I'm dead. And I've got the most strange reaction because I panic. I didn't want to go through the light. I felt I was too young. I felt that I had way more to live in my life. The first person I think about is my wife, instantly. And I look at the beings, and the first thing I say, it really was really coming from the heart, was, and forgive my language, but I said, no fucking way, pas
Yes.
maintenant. So I do mix French and English for some reason. Pas maintenant in French translates to not now in English. So no F way, not now. Like I'm too young, too young. And it seems like the request is accepted right away because I don't feel any negative emotion or I don't feel anything particular coming from those four beings. If that's what you want, and I feel being sucked back away from the light. The next instant, I am back in my living room in the house in the UK, and I look around because I'm completely surprised by what has just happened. I don't really comprehend what has just happened. My wife is touching my shoulder and she's looking at me quite alarmed and she's saying, "Are you okay?" I remember her replying, "Yes, I am." Like, what's wrong? And I look around and I see the paramedic. He's turning his back to me, still taking notes. I've got no idea for how long I've sort of disappeared. And the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, I've just hallucinated. So I grab the oxygen mask or the mask, and I, almost in a scientific manner, I'm saying if I've hallucinated because of the gases, it's quite easy to replicate. So again, I take a few deep breaths, nothing happens. My wife looks at me like I'm a bit crazy, like what's happening? But she sees I'm there, so she relaxes. But nothing happens. And then what hit me is that all of a sudden, the physical pain resumed. And that's when I realized that where I was a moment ago, floating in that dark void and going towards that light, I was completely pain free. My consciousness was still completely there. I was able to think, I was able to process emotions, but I had no physical pain. And as the pain comes back, and to me, it was like a wave hitting a lighthouse. It was so strong and instant that I regretted my decision on at that moment. I thought, actually, you know what? I was pain free on the other side. Why did I decide to come back? I mean, why? Why did I decide to go back through the pain? How could I have forgotten that I was in so much physical pain when I was over there? So again, I tried to breathe through the mask, nothing happens. And from there on, it's a long journey because then the paramedic says, well, listen, young man, we have to take you to the hospital. You're in quite bad conditions. And indeed, when I was in at the hospital, after doing a few checks, they quickly understood what was happening. And it was complications due to a previous surgery that I had had 24 years before. And unbeknown to me, I was living with a ticking bomb inside of me,
Wow.
and it had just exploded. So they tell me you may have to face a heavy surgery, a complicated one. So we discussed, are there ways that I can avoid going through a heavy surgery? Can we try non-invasive methods? And that's what we try to do. I remember in the hospital, there are a couple of stories. The first one is they assign me to a room, and in the afternoon there's a surgeon that comes in, and he looks at my file and he says, "Well, it's quite serious what you're having, but um, you know, I'm available right now, and basically I can take you to the operating room, and we can have surgery right now." And I remember at that moment, I gave a quick look to my wife, and she looked back at me like, that doesn't sound right. I had the utmost feeling within me to reject that, to say, no, don't accept that offer. Literally, it's the path to your own death. And I refused. I said, nope, not now. I'd rather we try non invasive methods first. If it doesn't work, then we will see what we can do. He did seem a bit like disappointed, and he came back the day after, still trying to offer to operate me. And with my wife, sad that I have to say that, but we called him the psychopath because he really had a crazy look in his eyes, and I was feeling so uncomfortable every time he came here. He sadly he looked like he was playing with life and not being really um, compassionate about patients. And a couple of days after, another surgeon came in. And this time we had a much better connection with that person. He understood my case. He understood that I was young and fit. And every time I was talking with him, I felt like, if I have to undergo surgery, I want him to look after me. And throughout the time in hospital, I was always feeling, despite the pain, despite the emotional load, despite not fully understanding exactly what was happening and what could happen in any hour, I was I think that's sort of like it's almost if I could feel presences around me that were reassuring me and telling me that everything's going to be okay. So I had that deep confidence about the fact that everything would be okay. So in the end, I had no choice but to have surgery done on me. And it's quite a heavy one. So I remember talking with the surgeon and saying to him, well, I'm young, what's my position, what should be done. And post surgery, I had another conversation with him, and he said, listen, when I operated you, I was really tempted to do more than the bare minimum. But then I remember our conversation, and I remember what you said, like, please don't do more than what you have to, because I'm still young. And he says, so basically, I know you're going to be okay, because I know you're young, I know you're fit, I know you're super healthy. So, but I've listened to you in a way. And yes, after that, it was a long road to physical recovery because it takes quite a few months with any abdominal surgery. You get to a point where it's even difficult to lift a simple cup of
Mm.
tea, coffee, water, whatever you have. We don't realize like how much the abdominal muscles are being involved into every movement you do. So the first 6 months were really about rehabbing myself, and then basically I think you get back to your feet 80% the first 6 months, and then it's an incremental 10% another 6 months, the last 10% another 6 months. I was very diligent with all my physio exercises. I was very diligent with um, my food and so on. I, you know 2.5 months later I was back to work. So I mean, it's not like massively preventing you from living your life. It's just that you have to really take it easy and slow. So that's D&D in itself.
Vincent, I wanted to ask you before we go on to something else about what you just said. Did you have, before you ND, did you have any beliefs? Had you heard of near-death experiences?
So my ever since I was a young kid, I always believed that there was something more to life. I remember being like a young child and looking up at the sky and thinking like there's so much life out there. I'm not talking about extraterrestrial life, but just that there's another world out there that I know about, and I'm just living on a on this planet and my life as Vincent. As I grew older, yes, I had read about near-death experiences, about people seeing the white light, and so on. But just before the NDE, actually, I was at a point where in my life I was not even believing uh, that there would be an afterlife or the possibility of an
Mhm.
afterlife. I had gone to the belief that you die and that's it. And I think it's a reflection of my sadness at the time about life, possibly because for the rest of my life I was always certain that there is a spirit side, and once you die, you just transition there.
Mm. Was there a message in a way, even if it's unconscious, about what your mission would be? Often, when people have near-death experiences, they talk about an understanding of, in a way, why they're there. And I know you saw those four beings which were outlined, and at that point it was difficult to recognize them, although you felt this amazing connection with them. And you said even more connected than your actually earthly family at the moment. So that's quite incredible. And I just wondered whether, after you came back, whether your relationship with death changed, and whether you recognized or realized that actually there was something for you to complete or do on this planet.
Not immediately is the short answer to that question, because I was so focused on my physical rehab, my mental and psychological rehab too, because um, it was a tough event in my life. I had to look at myself and realize that I was doing too much, and perhaps subconsciously I had called that upon myself. And I wasn't thinking about death too much at the time or the spirit world. I was very much grounded into reality, um, and pushing myself to do things I'd never done before, just living like a normal life, but a happier, more fulfilled life. The memory of the NDE, as crazy as it sounds to say it, it had vanished from me for quite a few months. It only came back because my mum sent me an article one day about a French doctor whose name is Jean-Jacques Charbonnier, I believe,
Charbonnier, oui, je
who
connais.
is absolutely fascinated with near-death experiences. And in partnership with a hypnotherapist at the time, he had developed a method to bring people to ND state, but without any of the physical ailment that comes with it. Because, as I say to people, don't do a ND. It means that there's something really wrong happening, so it's not recommended to anyone. He So she sent me that article. I remember reading it, and the author of the article was sort of submitting himself to the process, the protocol of the hypnotherapy or the hypnosis session. And he was describing floating in a dark void, seeing a light, meeting beings. And that reactivated something in me. And I remember sitting in a chair and reading that article on a laptop and thinking, it feels so familiar, like I've already been through that. And the memory flooded back to me instantly of when it happened and so on. And that evening, I remember going to my wife and saying to her, "Hey, do you remember on that Sunday morning before I was rushed to hospital? Did something strange happen?" And she went pale when I told that to her. I said, "You have to tell me because I remember like you were touching my shoulder at one point. What was that for?" And she explained that she had never mentioned it to me because she thought like I had just like had collapsed for a short moment, for a brief moment. But she said, actually, I thought you were dead because all of a sudden you dropped the oxygen mask, you your body just completely collapsed, and your eyes. It's not just like you fainted; it's just like you looked dead to me. And she explained that she kneeled by my side and she was about really to scream out of panic. And she touched my shoulder just to see if I was still present. And she said, "You didn't come back right away. It took like maybe 1 to 2 seconds." And I remember saying to her, "That's quite interesting because now you're sort of confirming that I did not hallucinate that episode." And on the other hand, um, we have a different notion of time. What lasted a couple of seconds for you seems like lasted more, perhaps like a solid minute for me. So we were like in two different environments at that moment. So that when the remembrance of the near-death experience came back to me, I started to do a lot of research about the spiritual side. And I had to drop a lot of my fears about the spiritual side because I was thinking, could there be negative spirits? Can you attach to negative entities to yourself? I wasn't too sure about that. And that's the moment when I became comfortable with death. It's like the weight of death was alleviated from my shoulders. Prior to that moment, so between the surgery and the remembrance of the NDE, I was still I was still scared of death. I thought like the health episode could happen again, and that was very scary as a thought to live with. Once I remember the NDE, I just thought like, well, actually, death is just a transition from one state of consciousness to the other, because I was still conscious on the other side. I didn't think of it as, or it didn't create anything specific in me, like a message or a mission. Not at all. If anything, I was happy to talk about the NDA to people and quickly realizing that there are many people who do not want to hear about it. Actually, it's a scary conversation for them. They're not comfortable with it. So you can't really push that onto anyone. And so I think I went a bit more inwards, read a lot of books, discovered the notion of channeling. Uh, I did QHHT, so sort of quantum healing hypnosis technique that takes you back to past lifetimes. So I think I was exploring, but always with a bit of a scientific background to it. Like, can I disprove any theory? Or if I try something, will I find a crack in the story? Will I find a fail that I can say, well, actually,
Mhm.
maybe that's not, 100% accurate. So I think I was more into understanding all this. And I wouldn't say I brought back any particular mission from it, just a better understanding of that episode of my life, but also just alleviating that fear of death that I've had ever since I was a young child, because it was the near death experience was simply my fifth encounter with death. So,
Yes, that's incredible, and I'm sure we'll come to that just in a sec, Vincent. But there was one more question that I was really curious about when you talk about it in your book. So you say, I think it was chapter 22, when you said there was a voice from a male figure, and it might not be in your near-death experience, it might be in one of your lucid dreams. But he said to you, it's possible to choose the circumstances of our departure, which I took it like you can actually choose when you are going to die. And maybe you actually decide that, in your so-called contract that you actually agree to before you come back to Earth, if you believe in reincarnation. So do you believe that this was your own creation, the fact that you had a time in space, on our earthly timeline where you could say, okay, I'm going to have this experience and it's going to teach me something?
it's a very good question because I've always wondered if it was just an exit door that I was able to take, or if it was part of my life experience to understand death and to understand that it was just a transition. Um, I do believe that it is possible for us to choose the timing of our departure, sometimes at a subconscious level, sometimes at a more conscious level. And I am of the belief this day that if you are, in a way, if you really are prepared for that, there could be a possibility that comes a day when you just say, lived my life, I've lived a happy life, or I've been of service, or whatever. I feel I'm complete. And basically, you just transition. I've asked that question to a channel, and the spirit in that was being channeled just said yes. And actually, in some ancient cultures, um, sometimes elders would just wake up one morning and say, "Well, I know that today is the day." And the tribe would gather around, they would have a celebration. And I love the way he put it. It's like, at one point in the day, that person just goes, but he said it still is accepted in some areas of this planet. Whereas the view today about death is like it has to go through either a painful physical or emotional. So it's either like a health issue or an accident. Uh, the old ways of you just die in your sleep seems to be like not accepted by society, but we always have this idea that it needs to go through a painful process.
Yes, but I think we have a lot to learn from other cultures about that, don't you think, Vincent? It's quite
Oh, absolutely.
incredible that we let people suffer so much as well. Which brings me to another question, which is about your guide. Um, you're going to tell us in a minute how you met your guide and your special angel, your guardian angel. And I wanted to know, how you speak to them. How are they helping you, generally speaking?
Yes, indeed. So I I'm of the belief that there's a guardian angel, and that guardian angel is in a way from your first breath to your last breath here with you all the way. And next to the guardian angel, you would have what we would call spirit guides, and those spirit guides would sort of tag along as and when is necessary. So they might have more experience in a specific area or domain, and basically could come and um, sort of like try to open the door for you about the specific areas or domains. So I feel like that's guides could change more frequently, but the guardian angel will still be there. So the guardian angel, I've always believed that I had a good start, or I had like because when you escape death 5 times in your life, um, in a way you have to believe that there's something you're here to do something perhaps, and there's someone really looking after you on the other side just to to keep you alive in every situation, so to speak. I did a guided meditation. It was a group meditation during which the theme was meeting your guardian angel, and it's one of the chapters that I've used in the book. About I found myself as a young Native American. Uh, I'm into like a kind of a very lush green environment, maybe a few centuries ago. There's no like advanced civilization or modern civilization as we would label it. And I see like a waterfall in the distance. And I know I have to go and climb that waterfall. So I just make my way through. All this is happening in meditation, of course. And when I reach the top of the waterfall, it's a beautiful plateau. And the sun is setting. And I can just see like many birds flying. Absolutely fantastic view. And I look, there's a forest nearby, and I see like that shape that comes out of the forest, and I know that's my guardian angel. So he's an old Native American, and he's got a very, very, very peaceful energy, very connected to nature, very connected to the animal kingdom, very connected to earth as well. During that meditation, he gave me a gift, and the gift was sort of like a necklace. There were many stones and gems, but also like animal, um, how do you call that? The griffes,
Amulet
euh, les griffes d'un chat, par exemple, ou
or
d'un
the
tigre,
claws?
the claws. So, yeah, so there were stone, gems, claws of animals, for example, or even animal teeth or things like that. And he explained to me, like, he made me wear it, and he really pressed it on the upper part of my chest and said, like, every time in life you feel a bit disconnected from nature and so on, all you have to do is tap your collar chest and or your
The
collarbone, sorry.
collarbone?
Yeah,
Mm.
the collarbone. And basically that will reconnect you through that gift. So I decided, because I was writing the novel at the time and it was just the beginning, that it would be quite fitting to invite that guardian angel as part of the story itself. So I'm describing it, and I'm describing how we met, and of course the conversations we're having in the novel, and how he's explaining many concepts about life, which through the main character is really questioning life itself. You know, why is life this way? Why is life that way? As for the other guides, at the time, I've included two in the novel, again, with the idea of making it fun and incorporating these experiences into it. I think I was more exploring the notion of extraterrestrial life, and those two guides are, in a way, non human guides. And the first one really came in dream. And I'm quite a lucid dreamer, as I explain in many of my videos. So I'm very aware when I'm dreaming, what I'm dreaming about, who I'm interacting with. I remember it was really a strange dream in which I could control a lot of things at will. And towards the end of the dream comes this person who was like dressed completely in black, and has a long black scarf and a black robe. And she comes towards me, and with a feminine voice, she says, "Hello, Vincent." And with a very um, sort of almost excited and playful way. And she removes her scarf, and I see that alien face looking at me. I panicked in my dream, and I just woke up because I was just not expecting that. And she came back in subsequent dreams, and I learned to communicate with her through dream. And I think it was more a case of opening my mind to the possibility of, different beings of consciousness, or different types of consciousnesses. And the third guide, just I was on a walk in a park one day during lunchtime. I was taking a break from my office job, and I cannot explain why. It's one of those situations where, again, you think you are hallucinating, but you're not. I was walking, and in front of me was that blue being, was just floating, and as right away I felt a feminine energy. She smiled at me. She was really, really playful. Um, and she gave me a big smile. She looked really, really, really strange because she had no feet. Um, she looked like a mix of a snake and a fish, but with that beautiful blue color as well, very vibrant. And she just stayed there like for no more than 3 seconds, and then the landscape was normal again. And I just remember thinking, wow, maybe that's the more playful part of me that I need to explore. So with these spirit guides or guardian angel, I don't tend to have long conversations. I think it's more like I've got a feeling, and that's the way I describe it in my book. Is they will very often communicate through feelings. So you have an intuition, or you have a feeling about doing something, and it's about paying attention to that feeling. And I know sometimes I can also have, if I really need to pay attention to something, um, I've got a bit of a sound in my right ear that comes around, and to me that's a sign of, okay, pay attention to what's happening right now. So I try to, as much as I can, of course, follow those feelings, those intuitions, and try to understand what they mean. And if it just means something that says, thumb up, you're in the right direction, or just like, no, actually, pick that book, or be inspired by, that vision, or by that documentary you're watching, whatever it may be.
It's interesting, like sort of showing the way. And it's interesting what you just said about the sound in your ear, because I heard something recently about Titanus, if that's the right pronunciation in English, Titanus in French, I think.
Okay.
That people who have that often is something from spirits trying to come through.
Okay.
So I thought that was really interesting that you said that. And when you mentioned the teeth of the animal being like jewel on a necklace, yesterday I was listening to somebody channeling. Only listened for a few minutes. I didn't have time really, but it was about teeth. And they said that teeth are like jewels.
Okay.
So it's interesting what you say, because I just heard it yesterday, like jewels, and they said, when you get rid of really teeth that you shouldn't, um, it's a problem, because the teeth actually correspond to different organs in our body. They have a correlation. So I thought that was really interesting, Vincent, when you said that about the jewels. But so back to your guides. So they're really with you, but they're not sort of communicating in a verbal way to you or a knowing way. Well, it is more of a knowing way. Perhaps when you need to change directions or when you need to understand something. Is that right? Did I understand that right? Mm.
Absolutely correct. Yes.
And when you
They
talk about aliens, there's a lot of people who said and say that aliens are maybe amongst us, or maybe some of them are ready to come and help us, because let's face it, the planet is a very, very difficult situation right now, and we could do with some help, to be honest. Um, but what is your take on that, about having aliens, even within our population, that maybe we don't notice them because they take our suits?
it's a good question because it's one where I've always believed that it's impossible, when you look at the stars
Mm.
that we are just alone in our little corner of the universe. Yet you can talk to some people who will tell you that no, we're alone. It's impossible that there's life elsewhere. Um, the same people will actually very often will tell you that once you die, it's just dark. There's nothing. It seems like the two beliefs are associated. I also have found, it's just my experience. And aliens. I don't really entertain the idea of aliens in the population, although it may very well be possible. I'm pretty certain that if you are in spirit form, you can temporarily come in human form, not for a very long time, but for like a few hours or a few days at max, and like take a human form, assist maybe a human at a very particular moment, and go back to the spirit side. So maybe aliens who have more consciousness could do that too. I don't think it's impossible. With regards to aliens, I'm not sure that if we were to travel out of outside the Earth and try to explore different systems, we would immediately meet them. I think there's a degree of consciousness, and therefore there's a degree of dimensional space and time. So if we are on Earth existing in a certain dimension or a certain vibration, aliens would exist on a slightly different vibration. So even if we were to meet, uh, we are sort of have to meet halfway each and every time. And also, what has always questioned me about aliens is us humans, we don't seem to really be at a stage to have the technology to go far away from the planet and explore. It's almost as if we have to do that job of that internal or that walk of inner walk first. Because I'm pretty certain that with all the technological advances, we could have been a lot faster and we could already be there. Having said that, sometimes I do listen to, and I'm sure you know about Bashar,
Mm.
because I love the way he explains things, and
Amazing.
it's quite interesting. He really simplifies it, and that's what I like about it, about the way he explained things. But sometimes I feel like I'm just listening to a a good spiritual teacher, not like supposedly an ET living in another civilization that is explaining all what reality is, so to speak. So I do believe everything is possible. Having said that, if there was an alien knocking at my door and saying like, "Come into our spaceship," I know I would still be a bit reluctant to do that. I would say, "Hey, I'm a human. I'm living on Earth, so uh, yeah, if you want to come around and have coffee, sit at the table, that's fine." But I'm not so sure about jumping
I
aboard.
know. I think most of us are not really ready for it yet, and therefore we would really be scared. But I don't know if you've noticed, but in America, NASA has actually opened the door now to more information, and there are people who were in or are still in the military that have come and taught, amongst even on television. So I found that really interesting. And I think in a way they are trying to prepare us, probably. That's how I see it anyway. But everybody
There
has,
is, yeah, there is a trend, and I think even Bashar mentions it that is it by late 2026, early 2027, there would
that's
be a
right.
revelation, and I think it's undeniable. I've read books, even books that are written by people with a very scientific mindset. One of them is called UFO. It's a book from a few years ago, and it really goes into detail in the details of military reports. So it's undeniable that um, there is technology out there, and that technology has to be manned, so to speak. I'm using the word in a very literal way, um, by a different type of living beings. And at the same time, I'll be honest, it would be fascinating if we were to have exchanges like between our civilizations and other civilizations, learn from each other, um, and 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 have all that understanding. I remember also listening to some channels and some of them saying that actually being a human is a lot harder than being an alien, and that there are a lot of alien life forms who've never been human before. So they're very curious about us in that sense, uh, because Earth is a planet of, yeah, where you experience opposites constantly. So yeah, it's really left, right, up,
Absolutely.
down, hot, hot, cold. And
It's
for them, it's
really,
absolutely fascinating.
I think it's very hard to live on Earth. And for people, it's really, really difficult, especially at the moment, which actually brings me back to think about the incident in the car with your cousins, because there was something about quantum jump or jumping lines, timelines. That's it. Is it okay to talk about that now, Vincent, and just sort of get into what happened in that car?
No, absolutely. It's again, it's a slice of my life. It's what I call my fourth encounter with death. So, just as a very quick summary, I had a car accident when I was a baby. When my parents, when I was a month old, my parents were on their way to meet my grandparents. I flew around the car because safety back in the 80s was not as good as it is today. And but I had nothing. Babies, I think we're quite malleable, so it's good for us to we can go through that. And nobody was injured, so it was okay. I had two back-to-back emergency surgeries when I was around 10 years old, and I had that car accident as a passenger at the age of 17. And it was, yeah, it's just the driver lost control of the car. And we kind of knew it could happen. It was one of my elder cousins, and the way he was driving um, led me and his brother to think like, yeah, it's unavoidable that at one point I mean, if not the three of us, he on his own would have a car accident. He wasn't reckless; he was just a bit too nervous. And yeah, we exited a village in the middle of an afternoon, and there had been roadworks that had not been signaled properly, and he was carrying a bit too much speed. The surface of the tarmac was not smooth, and he was in a corner, quite a steep one, so lost control of the car. And basically, I was just sitting as the front passenger. And I remember at that instant, like one moment everything's fine, and the next one, um, the car is just skidding on the road, and there's no control over it. And we headed right away into a grassy bank on the side of the road, and all the impact was where I was sitting. I just remember at that moment really thinking, that's it, I'm dead. There's no way I'm surviving that. And looking at the picture of the car following the accident, it was completely flattened where I was sitting. And as I explained in many videos, I'm quite a tall person. So uh, it was impossible to me. I don't even know how we escaped that. So none of us were injured. Actually, again, just maybe I'd have a couple of scars on my elbow because of the shattered glass. And once we got out of the car, but the car hit the grassy bank, flipped on its roof, went on the other side of the road, almost ended up in a ditch. So it was quite a heavy accident. I had to spend a couple of days in hospital just to get checked that I had no like brain damage or anything. Um, but to me, at that moment, the last memory I have or the last recollection was we're about to crash and that's it. End of game. It's death. And moments later, I just open my eyes and I'm laying on the grass on the side of a road. I'm seeing a tire above my head and I'm just wondering what's happening. I'm looking at a clear blue sky in the summer and I'm completely disoriented. I just wonder where I am. And there's a firefighter that quickly comes in because that happened in France and they are sort of like emergency response people. And he asked me like a set of questions that reactivated my memory. I just remember being completely baffled by the ability to answer. So he would ask, "What happened?" And I would have no idea, but I would just blurt, "Oh, we had a car accident," without even understanding why. He would say, "Okay, where are you?" I would say, "Well, we're between that village and between the lake." "Okay, what day of the week is it?" No clue, but we're Wednesday, and all those things were coming back to me so instantly. What I realized after is it possibly that yes, I had died, but I decided to come back. And actually, perhaps the three of us with my two other cousins, we had died, but we had decided to come back and continue with life. Um, Now, apparently, that would create a new timeline. So there is a timeline in which the three of us do die in a car accident, but somehow, somewhat, our consciousness decides that no, we want to carry on. So in a way, we create a new story that is very similar to the previous one. And then we can tell where we had a car accident, but we survived it, so to speak. And exploring timelines is quite fascinating because it really gives you the, once you explore time, and it's something I really did in the novel, the fact that the future is not written and the past, actually, you have many, many, many past. It just depends where you stand in the present moment. So, and the past is almost, it's not that it's non-existent, but it's just a way of giving you like a feeling of continuity in this life. So you can explain your present moment, and you know I can tell you where I bought that shirt and which year I bought it. But actually, uh, it could be that I've changed so many timelines since then that it was a different me or a different timeline in which I did bought that very specific shirt, for example. It's quite fascinating. It's mind-boggling, and sometimes it even hurts my own brain if I start to think too much about the possibilities.
Yes, I think it's a difficult concept to get my head around, really. And when you said, you know, the timeline and you have different possibilities of life, um, would you, if you jump the timeline, would you actually, in your opinion, remember what the previous timeline would be? Because when you came back, of course, you came back and picked up the story of you as Vincent from where you were in that car accident. So could you have chosen to be on a timeline where you don't remember all that and create another reality?
It's a very, very good question. I believe it is possible. And what really questioned me, if that's the case, is everybody around you has to support that story. So my parents would have to say, "Oh yeah, remember you had a car accident with your cousins, and we had to come to the scene of the car crash and take you to the hospital." Um, Whereas in a different timeline, they would say, "Well, actually, no, you know, you cease to exist, and actually, we learn to live without you." So it's almost as if our consciousness exists on all different timelines, and we just decide to hop from one to the next. But the consciousnesses of people around you do the exact same thing. So the story can actually make sense. And if you really, really push the argument, you end up with one conclusion, which is it's a bit of a sad conclusion at times, but that there's only you. And all the story is just yours. But everybody around is just like a reflection of you supporting a story that you created for your own experience, your own growth as a spiritual being. I don't like to go too much into that because A, I find it a bit sad. And sometimes I do wonder if what I call the central point of consciousness or God has a bit of that sadness within it of realizing that it's on its own and so creating all those experiences. But also, I do believe, and perhaps I choose to believe, that there are many spirits, and we just basically have that sort of quantum ability to exist in multiple timelines at once. Consciously, we just pick one and we go through that one to the next, to the next. And the consciousness of the people around us is doing the exact same thing. And sometimes we may choose consciously to always be on the same timeline with other people, or sometimes we're just accessing a part of their consciousness that is available. So, say, for example, my parents, but perhaps their consciousness consciously is on a complete different timeline.
Wow.
And that I do like to explore. And yeah, the idea of being all alone I find is a bit sad. So I prefer to go through the,
Yes.
or what if actually, who am I interacting with? Of course, treat everyone with respect because ultimately, at the end of the day, um, people around you are people around you. So it's you have to to not fall into the well, it's just me. In that case, I can do whatever I want. I don't think it would be a very safe thing to do or a very mentally sane thing to do either.
Absolutely. And it has to feel right, to people, whichever way they want to look at spiritual things or quantum science and all that sort of thing. It has to ring true to you and to really come to your own conclusion. But it leads me to think about reincarnation as well when you talk about timeline, because a lot of people call them having parallel lives, which in a way makes me think of your timelines. Um, you said that you had a message or a knowing, someone, I can't remember if it's a guide or somebody in spirit told you that you actually lived 1,156 lives. And that was very precise, actually. Um, so do you think that you're living them all at the same time?
Yes, I do think because the more I'm learning about it, the more I'm realizing the sometimes the influences of some specific lifetimes could actually play a role in this current lifetime. And probably what I'm experiencing as Vincent in this lifetime plays a role on all the other lifetimes that are happening in parallel. So to me, on the spirit side, there is that notion that the spirit side would share that there is no time, everything is instant. Whereas you go through a more human experience in which it's physical reality, and there is that notion of always experiencing a little delay between things and therefore experiencing time and space. So I've come to the conclusion that past lives are not really past lives. They really are parallel lives and they are still happening. Um, I won't say the name, but during a channeling session, the spirit being channeled told me that I was a um, a person during a very specific time in history that had quite a prominent role. And he said, like, this lifetime, um, it's not that it has an influence on you, but it was such an important one for you that look into your life, what moments where this lifetime could have played an influence. And because he was quite a historical person, I was able to do some research. And it's a very misunderstood person too, which is quite interesting. Someone who probably was way ahead of his time um, for the time, but got caught up into all the politics of life, so to speak. So history has not been very kind on that person. Yet history also recalls that this person had like really, really um, some visions that were completely ahead of his time. And it's quite interesting because as I did that exercise, I was able to actually say, oh, when I was young, I used to react that way. So I could see exactly how that influence could be there. Now, I also have to take that with a pinch of salt. Is it really one of my past slash parallel lifetime, or is it just the spirit mentioning it to me so that it makes me realize some things about myself? Who's to know until I get to the other side? I'm not sure I will have like a definitive answer on that one. but nonetheless find it interesting when you find those little connections in this sort of like different lives.
It's good to leave the door open to discussion and because really so much of it is such a mystery to us still, even though we can find out a lot more with near-death experiences. But there's a lot of people who, well, maybe not a lot, there's a few people I've met who said to me, this is my last life. I'm not coming back to Earth. I mean, it could have life carries on somewhere else, maybe other planets as well, or maybe they are an energy, who knows. And I found that fascinating. And often with those people, I have a feeling, when I'm present with them, that, yeah, they could be right. And there is a pureness that one cannot explain, a pureness in character, pureness in personality. And maybe it's that I'm sort of, looking at their soul in a way and think, this guy is really, yeah, he's understood. Do you know what I mean, Vincent?
Mm-mm.
And I wondered, really, my question is to you, do you think, I know we talked about parallel life, it's all happening at the same time, but just for a minute, think about, in an earthy way of explaining it, do you think it could be your last time on planet Earth, or do you think you're going to come back? Or you don't know?
I, I stumbled across the notion that it could be the last lifetime for many people on this planet. That really talked to me. Also, because I was thinking, if there's a way for it to be my last lifetime and never have to experience this planet again, please tell me how. But the more I'm growing, the more I'm realizing that it could more than the last lifetime on Earth. It's more that the end of a cycle of lives, and through which you've come to completion of yourself, and you get to a point where there's no need to experience the duality and the polarity of Earth again, because in a way I will use the word, you've mastered it so much, you've understood it, you've played with it, you've done it all, although there's always an experience to be had on this planet, that's for certain. But it comes to a point where your consciousness gets to such a level that, yes, you will take it elsewhere to experience different things. So it is very possible that this is my last lifetime. But then it's also possible that once you're on the other side, you say, you know, I could do another cycle, or I could do just one more. Or I see that, maybe if I jump in that timeline, because I also believe that from a spirit side, you could decide you can look at the whole history and possibilities of Earth, and you could say, well, you know, let's go to, I'm going to say like 3,567, um, you know, and or maybe I'll go way back in the past. And so I think everything is possible. So whatever you choose, you really do it for your own growth. I do believe, though, yeah, it's possible that for many people, it's the last lifetime, and it's also it has a very grounding effect because it tells you that you you want to do good in a way, playing the human game of being caught up into distractions and all those things. Although I'm the first one to admit that I did it in this life too. Nobody's perfect, as we discussed recently, and but yeah, it is very possible, and in a way, yes, I would hope for it to be the last one because it would just be like there's such completeness to it, in my opinion, with regards to death specifically, and seeing that okay, I do understand it, I don't fear it. It's true that when every time I was faced with death and I came back, my fear was that, oh, if I die now, so say 2018, I know I would have to come back because I'm not complete. And I didn't like the idea. It's something I meditated on afterwards and realized too.
Vincent, we could listen to your wise words for hours. It goes
You're
very
very kind.
quickly when you interview people. So I'm going to bring you back to earth now to finish this interview. And I know, Vincent, that you have been through a lot of pain in your life, with all the physical pain I'm talking about. And I wonder if you have anything to say to the audience, perhaps, who are going through maybe the same kind of thing, or maybe a different kind of pain, whether it is spiritual or physical or emotional, and the state of the earth is in difficulty. So what wise words, just to finish, would you have to encourage people to, in a way, stay with where they are? Because as you said yourself, you didn't want to let yourself go into something amazing because you knew you would have to come back and work on it in a different life. So what would be your conclusion for that, Vincent?
There are a couple of things I'm going to say. The first one is being very human, very material, and I will say just drop the news. Um, I don't watch the news. I just, of course, I just keep an eye on like the top headlines from time to time. I do need it for my professional activities too, but I'm not too involved into that. And I think that's one of the main thing when I talk to a lot of different people, they can be so negative, uh, and not negative. I could see, within themselves, they're not meant to be that negative, but their mind is being brainwashed constantly by negative content, by fear mongering, by hate speech, and all those sort of things. And it's quite sad to see that because those people, they are really hopeless deep down. And if you tell them um, they don't want to live long, they don't really have any hope that the world could change and become a better place. I'm still a hopeful one. I don't know if I'm going to live very long, but I'm still very hopeful that the planet will turn things around. So hang in there would probably be the wise words, but also detach yourself from everything that seems too negative, so you can better reconnect to yourself. And the second thing I would say is one I often said is whenever things are challenging in life, and I know it's not always easy in the moment or in the heat of the moment, but when you find a bit of a calmer time, um, just go silent and smile. I find it to be very powerful for myself. And I could even say that sometimes I forget to do it when I know better. But having that moment when you smile, you will start to see. I mean, I find it better to close my eyes and have that inner smile. I feel something instantly relaxes in my body and my energy relaxes. And even if, life out there is tough and there's a lot happening from an emotional standpoint and so on, try to do that. When you're in physical pain, it's a lot harder to do. That I agree. Um, but there are moments when, if you have a bit of a respite, try to smile nonetheless if you can. Appreciate it's not always easy, but that little moment of smiling seems to really rebalance or bring more harmony into the body. At least it does to me. So I'm sharing that advice. And if it works for you, happy days too.
Thank you so much, Vincent. I love those words. And when I read that, I thought, yes, that is really what, we all need to do, really. And yes, please hang on in there, because I think if we do, we're going to be nicely surprised. At least that's what I'm hoping for. So, Vincent, thank you so much for being with us today and telling your touching and very interesting stories. So I'll say goodbye to everyone now. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And I wish you all the best wherever you are in the world. See you soon. Bye.